Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar specifically about NMDA's Healthy Soil Program and how you, as an eligible entity, can access a share of the funding we make available through that program as grants. My name is Katie Getz, and along with Dean Bruce, who you will be hearing from this morning, we are the co-leads for NMDA's Healthy Soil Program. We welcome you to this morning's presentation. So a bit of housekeeping to get us started for the morning. We welcome you, invite you to introduce yourself in the chat, noting the name of the eligible entity that you represent, and whether that eligible entity encompasses primarily cropland, rangeland, maybe there's another form of land management occurring within your jurisdictional boundaries. We'd be very curious to hear the sort of land within your management. We ask a couple of things of you this morning, that during the presentation you stay on mute, and that is the microphone icon at the far lower left-hand side of your screen. We ask you to stay on mute in order that we get good quality audio for this morning's recording of the webinar. We ask that during the presentation you type your question into the chat, and that after the presentation you can shift gears and use that raise hand feature, which is on the far right side of the screen. You'll see it with that yellow arrow pointing downward. Use that feature and unmute your question to ask out loud. There's always a question that seems to translate best in real time, and you're welcome to ask it in that way after the presentation. As I said, we are recording, and that means that we will have a subtitled video available at some point on down the road, but more immediately, we will have slides available for you. Both those artifacts will be posted on our website, and we'll reference that website throughout today's presentation. So again, we welcome you, and thanks for being with us for what might be the next 90 minutes. We'll see how things go this morning. So just a quick kick of the tires on today's agenda. We know we're all gathered here to help hear about NMDA's Healthy Soil Program grants, specifically how eligible entities can access those grants. So we'll talk about that in that first slide about who can apply. We'll talk about the types of projects that are eligible, when they can happen, where they can happen, and how your eligible entity can apply. Of course, we'll also talk about what grant applications are successful, what makes them successful, and what might make others fall short of that goal. So the first question, who in New Mexico can apply for NMDA's Healthy Soil Program grants? I want you to focus on the left-hand side of the screen today. That's really who today's webinar is for. So if you're here representing a pueblo, a tribe, a nation, you're representing an acequia, you're representing your local land grant, perhaps your soil and water conservation district, you're representing cooperative extension with NMSU in some way, whether at the county level or wearing another hat within extension, or you're here on behalf of another local governmental entity with proven land management capacity to support healthy soil, you're in the right place. Very quickly, I'm going to shift our focus to the right-hand side of the screen. If you are here as a non-governmental party, maybe you're an individual, maybe you're a business, maybe you are a nonprofit who manages land in New Mexico, a separate webinar occurred earlier this week just for you, and you'll find those details on our Healthy Soil Program website. But what you want to look for there is individual applicant information. So again, we're gathered here this morning talking with eligible entities, those local governmental entities that manage land in some sort of way. They own it or they partner with other land managers within their jurisdiction to carry out good natural resource improvement projects. Regardless of your applicant type, we've got the same 2-month window to cast an application for NMDA's Healthy Soil Program grants. You'll see with me in the center of the screen, there's some bright red text. That illustrates for you the deadline. So you'll see that we don't have an application yet. We will launch that February 23rd, about a month from now, and we'll close that window April 26th at 12 p.m. That's noon, and that's Mountain Time. So you'll want to pay attention to those dates as you go about your natural course of work, working for your eligible entity or helping to lead it. At the bottom of the screen, something we'll dig more into further in the presentation, but there's 2 funding caps depending on how you are situated with your ability to access big funding. So if you have a UEI, and we'll talk about what that means later, but if you've got that certain identifier with the federal government, you've got a proven track record accessing big funds and utilizing those big funds, if you've got that UEI, you can access up to $100,000 per project under NMDA's Healthy Soil Program grants. On the other hand, if you don't possess a UEI, that's okay. You can still apply for funding, just at a lesser amount. So for eligible entities in that boat, $25,000 per project is the upper limit. Again, we'll talk more about that in just a few slides. First things first, what projects are eligible? Now that we know who's eligible, what projects are eligible for NMDA's Healthy Soil Program grants? Were you to go back to the state law that created our program, you would read these just as they appear on the screen, those 5 soil health principles. So I'll run through those quickly and then offer just a few examples of each one. The first soil health principle is keeping soil covered. Principle number 2, minimizing disturbance on cropland and minimizing external inputs. Principle number 3, maximizing biodiversity. Principle number 4, maintaining a living root. And last but not least, importantly, integrating animals into land management. And the law goes so far as to name species as large as grazing animals, clear down to those keystone species such as earthworms. So just to give you a few examples of what those principles look like when they're actually in practice, what's the agricultural conservation practice that would actually implement those principles? So in terms of keeping soil covered, an easy one, planting cover crops. And that's a popular project that we fund through NMDA's Healthy Soil Program. Principle number 2, that minimizing disturbance idea and minimizing external inputs, we offer it to you in the first example. A really good way to implement that principle is to limit tillage and synthetic inputs. Principle number 3, all about maximizing biodiversity, represented there with some colorful pictures of a lot of different fauna. So a good way to implement that principle is to use diverse crop rotations. Principle number 4, maintaining a living root. Simply, it could be just reducing fallowing on a piece of land that you manage. Number 5, integrating animals into land management. It may be as simple as taking that cropland that you manage and bringing in some livestock. So again, what projects are eligible? Well, if you're left wanting a little more information, you're welcome to visit our website, the Healthy Soil Program homepage, because with a few scrolls of the mouse, you're going to land on this map that we've got screenshotted here on the page here. So once you land on this map, if you'll click on those red dots, those are projects implemented by other eligible entities, other tribal governments, other land grants, other soil and water conservation districts, other extension offices. We've even funded a project through a local irrigation district, a conservancy district before. So again, those red dots illustrate for you those locally governmentally run projects funded through NMDA's Healthy Soil Program. Importantly, when are projects eligible to happen? So you all know, working in government as we do, that we're bound by the terms of our fiscal calendar. At the state level, of course, that runs July 1st through June the 30th. So you'll notice those 2 months, both July and June, are X'd out on our calendar in terms of when project activities can actually occur. There's a reason for that. We'll take that month of July to make award announcements to people, to get you brought in with some training, to get contracts executed. And that puts us in good standing to begin project activities August 1st. So we run through the calendar all the way up nearly through the end of May. May 24th is the last day for activities, but that gives us that month of June, and you that month of June, to wrap up any reporting requirements, any invoicing requirements, make sure that any reimbursements due to your eligible entity have actually been returned to you. So again, what we're looking at here for our fiscal year 2025 projects are projects that start August 1st and end toward the end of May 2025, nearly a full 10 months. Where Healthy Soil Program funded projects can happen, that's what this slide's all about. And you can read there from the top that we fund projects that occur on cropland, rangeland, forest land, orchards, you name it. We've also funded some projects that occur in gardens, whether those are at the market level or the subsistence level. The bottom line is that projects can happen only where there is an existing relationship between your eligible entity and that project site. Now, you don't have to own it. And what we say in that next bullet point is that if it's owned by someone else, just make sure you have their permission, their buy-in, their full support for the project in order to pitch a project to us as occurring on that project site. Last but not least, we want to offer this tidbit that there is no minimum acreage requirement for these projects, that we have funded projects occurring not only in acreages, but also square feet in years past. So an important question here, now that we've kind of gone through the background of these grants, how can your eligible entity apply for one of those grants? And for that piece of the presentation, I'll turn it over to my co-lead, Dean Bruce.
Okay, thank you, Katie. So if we'll turn to the next slide, we'll begin the process of helping you as an eligible entity understand how you can apply for a grant for NMDA's Healthy Soil Program. Okay, the one thing you want to understand is all things Healthy Soil Program are tied to our website. We have a specific portion of our NMDA Healthy Soil Program website that is devoted especially for eligible entities. And so everything that you could possibly need to put together a quality application for the Healthy Soil Program as an eligible entity is contained on that website. And we'll be providing those links later on in the presentations. Okay, so one of the first things you want to do as an eligible entity is you want to identify the project site or sites within your eligible entity's jurisdiction that you want to focus on. Once you've identified sites, you also want to start to look at those soil health related resource concerns that your project will address. You as the eligible entity can consider a number of factors in deciding where to implement your project. Some of these factors can include the land with the greatest potential for soil health improvement, the number of local land managers that might be benefited from this project, the plant communities and animal populations that might be benefited, the visibility of the project to other local land managers, the public, students, etc. So you might consider, where the project occurs so that it's visible to a variety of land users or potential beneficiaries of the project. And then also you want to take into account the proximity of the project site to your eligible entity headquarters. So you want to have fairly easy access, but at the same time, again, you want to have that project site selected that is going to enable you to benefit soil health to the maximum extent possible. So when we talk about resource concerns, this is one of the things that you as an eligible entity are going to need to determine. You're going to need to determine not only the location, but those soil health related resource concerns that your project will address. Some of the examples of soil health related resource concerns could include erosion, either through wind or water, compaction that causes production problems, depleted organic matter, maybe it's concentration of salts or other chemicals, loss or degradation of soil organism habitat. It could be aggregate stability or poor soil structure. I want to make note that this is not a complete list of every resource concern that you could identify that's related to soil health, but we just want to get the ball rolling in your mind to start thinking about, okay, we as an eligible entity, what is our focus? What are some of the primary resource concerns that we see within our district? So that's where you're going to want to start to think about that. Once you've selected a project site, you want to start looking at those resource concerns. And the resource concerns that are present on some of the lands, it's always good to have a second set of eyes looking at those resource concerns. And so we highly encourage SWCDs, acequias, land grants, New Mexico State Cooperative Extension Service, Pueblos, tribes, or nations to get with your local NRCS office. Because your local NRCS office has a wealth of information on the natural resource concerns within their area. They can help you identify those soil health related resource concerns. NRCS has 35 local service centers in New Mexico, and there's a link right there that can be provided later to help you find your local service center if you don't know where they're at. And they would be more than happy to help you start identifying some of those resource concerns that your project might focus on. So once you've selected your project site, you've started thinking about resource concerns, it's now time to start actually developing your project idea. One of the key questions you might want to ask yourself when developing your project idea is, which soil health related natural resource concerns is our project going to focus on? Because it's likely you will have multiple resource concerns that exist within an area. You're going to have to focus on one or more of those. So that's one of the questions you might want to ask yourself. In addition to that, you might want to ask yourself, which soil health principles will best address those resource concerns? So, based on the resource concerns you've identified, the soil health principles that Katie mentioned earlier that are spelled out for us in the Act, it's those soil health principles that are going to help guide your project. And then finally, you're going to begin to ask yourself, okay, I've identified my resource concerns. I think I know which soil health principles we're going to use. So now, which agricultural or conservation practices will best put those soil health principles into action and therefore improve soil health on your project? So those are some of the key questions you need to begin to ask yourself as you're developing a project idea. Some of the things that NMDA has developed to help you along this process, we have a couple different documents that we created in conjunction with NRCS as well as NMSU Cooperative Extension Service. And these are our resource concern guide sheets. What these guide sheets do is they show the relationship between soil health related resource concerns, soil health principles, and examples of agricultural or conservation practices that you can use as a eligible entity to address those resource concerns that you've identified. So we highly encourage you to take a look at these documents. Again, these are not comprehensive documents. They're simply used as a guide, but they can help you draw the lines between those resource concerns that you've identified that your eligible entity wants to focus on, and then ties that to the soil health principles, as well as giving you a list of potential agriculture practices that you can utilize to address those. Special note, the resource concern guide sheets are simply designed to help you. This is not something that you'll have to turn in as part of your application packet, but they're designed to guide you through the process to put together a quality grant application that is going to have the best potential for improving soil health. So in addition to developing your project idea based on the resource concerns, you need to take some other factors into account. Some of those factors are which of our planned agriculture conservation practices that we've selected can actually be implemented between August and May. So timing is critical. Unfortunately, we are bound by the state's fiscal year calendar, and this is the time frame that the grant does occur. And so you need to begin to ask yourself, can we implement the practices we would like to between August and May? So you need to kind of have that in the back of your mind. In addition, you need to start researching what goods and services will we need in order to implement those conservation practices. So you start researching, based on the practice, what is it we are going to need to purchase to actually implement those. You also need to decide from which company you're going to source those goods and services. And finally, what are the actual costs of those goods and services? So these are all things to have in the back of your mind as you're developing an idea. Where do we want to focus this project? What are the priority resource concerns that we've identified in our area that we're going to focus on, and what kind of ag practices are we going to utilize, and then what's it going to take to actually implement those? You'll notice there's a bright yellow circle that tells you to take a look at the FAQ and other resources that are available on our website. The FAQ is a fairly comprehensive document that will guide you through the things that will help you be successful in developing a grant application. And so really want to encourage you to visit our website and make use of all the resources that you have available on our website, the FAQ, the resource concern guide sheets, as well as other things to really put together a solid application package that's going to help benefit soil health in your district. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Katie and let her continue.
Thank you, Dean. So picking up from Dean, he mentioned step number 1 is identifying your project site and the soil health related resource concerns you attempt to address with your project there. And then really working through project development, thinking about the priorities that you want to address, how you'll address them, what goods and services you'll need, that sort of thing. So now we're up to the step of working on that online grant application. You heard me say earlier on that we actually don't have that ready for you quite yet. Today's purpose is to prepare you to apply. So to get all those ducks in a row such that when that application is made available on February 23rd, you've already done a good bit of the legwork to start completing that document. So part of working on that online grant application is putting together a solid budget like we've talked about. And the budget and the timeline you'll see later in our documents are integrated. One really important question. This is me circling back to something you heard me say in an earlier slide, and that is funding caps. So as you'll read with me here on the left-hand side of the screen, as a refresher, $100,000 is that upper limit for an eligible entity that has a UEI, a unique entity ID. Now, this comes from the federal government, the System for Award Management. We shorthanded around NMDA as SAM.gov. So basically that demonstrates to us here at the State Department of Agriculture that your entity has a proven track record for managing big projects. That's what we're after here. If your entity does not have a UEI, $25,000, as I said earlier, is the upper limit. Now, this word UEI sounds pretty alien to you. That's okay. This is a change made at SAM.gov back in April of 2022. So perhaps your entity has a DUNS number or had a DUNS number. UEIs are what replaced DUNS numbers. But again, our concern at NMDA is looking to see that eligible entities applying for big funding through our program actually have a proven track record of managing big funds. So that's the intent of this requirement there and how it determines what level of funding you can seek for your project. If you don't have a UEI in hand, perhaps you had a DUNS number at one time, but you don't have a UEI in hand, you can get one through SAM.gov. Again, this is out of NMDA's hands. We just look to this piece of information in your application, again, to demonstrate your eligible entity's ability to handle big projects with big dollars associated. So as you'll read with me on the bottom of the screen there, the process for securing a UEI from SAM.gov, it's free, but it can be time consuming. Meaning if you're on today's webinar going, oh my gosh, we don't have a UEI, it's time to get started on that process in hopes that you would have one in hand by our application deadline of April the 26th of 2024. So again, if you don't have a UEI, but you intend to apply for big funding, go ahead and start making that process with SAM.gov and in hopes of securing that by our application deadline. Again, without that UEI by April 26th, your funding is capped at $25,000 per project for your eligible entity. I mentioned the timeline and budget being integrated. So if you've applied for Healthy Soil Program funding at the eligible entity level in the last couple of years, this document should look relatively familiar to you. I'll walk through it briefly here, and then we'll actually take a peek at it, the actual document, and run through some examples later on. But you'll notice on the left-hand side of the screen, what we really focus on there are the timeline of project activities. So what are you doing and when? Not what are you seeking funding for, but what are you doing and when and where is really useful too, especially thinking about how widespread some of these projects are. Now those color columns that appear in color, first the green, then the yellow, then the peach sort of color, those really speak to what are you requesting Healthy Soil Program grant funding to acquire. Those may be goods, those may be services. And when we get down to goods, we're talking durable goods. Those are things you can touch that last a period of years versus those non-durable goods, which they're things you can touch, but they're things that you're going to consume probably during the life of the grant. So cover crop seed, compost, mulch, basic supplies for a Healthy Soil Program type project. Again, we'll get into more specifics later on, but I wanted you to have eyes on what you will see when you start to complete that timeline and budget template. It's all in one. This is a really critical document that we look at throughout the course of these 10-month grants. With just putting eyes on this document, we know, is a project on track? Are the grantees actually doing what they say they're going to be doing when they say they're going to do them? And also, are they on track with their spending? Are they buying the goods and the services that were part of their approved budget? So the way we share with you that this is a really important document, in years past, it has occupied a full 40% of the 100 points allocated to a project. 40 points right here. So this is a really critical document that you don't want to treat lightly. You want to make sure you're researching all of those goods and services. Like Dean said, what are the companies that you're seeking those supplies from, those goods and those services? What do they cost? What are the amounts? Be really specific, really detailed in this document. We always get this question of what can I buy with Healthy Soil Program funds? And certainly a PowerPoint presentation and a 90-minute presentation is not enough to walk through all of the universe of possibilities that could be considered healthy soil making type goods and services. So this is just a shorthand slide for you to refer to in a visual way, but we really encourage you to, again, go see that frequently asked questions document, that FAQ that lives on our website, because we actually spell out far more examples there of what's out of bounds and what's in bounds. Just a few examples, like I say, for consideration this morning. On the left-hand side of the screen, what is eligible for consideration? So when we're talking those tangible goods that have a short lifespan, those non-durable goods, things like cover crop seed, things like compost, mulch, biochar, those are all fundable or considerable for funding within our program. Durable goods is interesting because of our procurement code. So follow along with me here. $5,000 and above is out of bounds for what can be purchased with Healthy Soil Program funding in terms of durable goods. But if it's a durable good, meaning something you can touch that will last a period of years, if the price tag is $4,999.99 or less, you should be in good shape so long as it's got a demonstrable connection to soil health. Those are really two things that we look for when it comes to durable goods. But that $5,000 threshold is firm. So if you're seeking durable goods, make sure you're seeking them with respect to that funding cap. What we consider services are specialized bits of work that are directly related to soil health. So that would include things like testing the soil, perhaps rent no-till equipment. Maybe education and outreach is a component of your project because you're serving the land managers within your jurisdiction. Maybe there's a special speaker you want to bring in to speak to your audience. Again, these are specialized bits of labor that we would consider services that may be eligible for funding consideration. Shifting your attention now to the right-hand side of the screen, again, just a few examples here. We've got much more detail on our website within that frequently asked questions document. But in terms of what's out of bounds for the non-durable goods, right off the bat, cash crop seed is out. So if you're looking to plant a chili crop, if you're looking to put in some peach trees, know that those will not be funded because we look at those as cash crops. Same story for livestock. Those are out of bounds in terms of purchases you can make with Healthy Soil Program funding. Again, a reference to that $5,000 bright red line for our durable goods purchases. A lot of your equipment is going to be at or above that amount. So necessarily, those durable goods are automatically out of bounds for funding consideration. In terms of services, if it's specialized work, but it's not related to soil health improvement, we'll look at that and consider it ineligible for funding consideration. Again, putting an exclamation point on something you've heard Dean and me say quite a bit, check out that frequently asked questions document, that FAQ on our website. Lots more examples available to you there. As I said earlier, this application for NMDA's Healthy Soil Program, it's not available quite yet. But when it is on February 23rd, this is the screen you will land on. Again, everything about NMDA's Healthy Soil Program is linked or lives at our Healthy Soil Program website. So we'll show you where you would find this link in just a moment. But again, a 2-month window, so kicking off February 23rd, calling for all applications to be submitted to us complete and on time before 12 p.m. noon on April the 26th. That's a Friday. So you can mark your calendars with these two important dates. Get to work on February 23rd and work up until April 26th at noon. And we've got a checklist on our website. We'll show that to you in just a moment. But using this checklist to make sure that you've got everything you're going to need in order to make application for a healthy soil grant as an eligible entity. So we ask that you include project site images to give us a visual of where the project will be occurring. We didn't mention this, but we'll show it to you on our website. If your eligible entity perhaps owns some livestock, manages some livestock, and you'd like to do a bale grazing project to really kickstart the biology on the rangeland there, we will require you to work with NRCS to develop the template around that bale grazing component of your project to really demonstrate that you've got all the pieces in place there for a good bale grazing project rather than a feeding project. So that's why this shows up as part of this checklist. We talked about the timeline and budget template and how critical and central that is to your project. So of course, you'll want to make sure you attach that in the right spot on your online application. And if you choose to submit supporting materials, maybe they're letters from local landowners, maybe there are local natural resource interested organizations that really support your project. You're welcome to solicit letters of support from those organizations, from those people, and submit them as part of your application. But again, not a requirement because certainly some eligible entities will be doing projects on their own land. So these supporting items, as we say here on the screen, are optional. We mentioned this question at the start. What makes certain Healthy Soil Program grant applications successful and others not as successful that don't make the cut in this competitive process? So just a few things to consider as you're putting together your application. Successful applications on the left-hand side of the screen, they're complete. Nothing is left blank, nothing is unaddressed, nothing is half-baked in terms of answers to the questions contained in our application. Of course, they're submitted on time, so you don't want to wait until 11:59 a.m. on Friday, April 26th to submit your application. Make sure you account for any of those glitches, maybe some shaky Wi-Fi. Make sure you're on time with your application because we will not accept incomplete applications. We will not accept late applications. Another way to achieve a successful application is make sure it actually improves soil health. So we have seen applications from our other applicant types submitting projects that really aim to create a beautiful landscape. We look at that and say, what we're looking for here is soil health improvement. So everything has got to point back to soil health improvement. Another example I offer on the right-hand side of the screen is feeding livestock. It doesn't constitute soil health improvement. So you want to make sure that your proposal is really rooted in soil health and demonstrates a good understanding of that. Another way to achieve a successful application is make sure that your project is benefiting the eligible entity and or multiple land managers within its jurisdiction. If there's just one land manager who benefits from this project, probably that person ought to apply as an individual applicant, not through you as an eligible entity. So that's really the distinction we're making there. Successful applications are also clear and specific about their project activities and the timeline for implementing those activities. You saw that on that combined timeline and budget template. Speaking of budgets, we want to see budgets that are clear, that are specific, that are well researched. So if we pop open your budget and we see that you, instead of listing the cost of things, you list unknown, we'll say, you know what, there's some research that needs to be done in order to make this a fully fleshed out proposal. We're looking for you to do that research, to investigate what are the names of the goods and services you'll require for your project, what do they cost, and in what amounts will you need those things. An example that I like to reference here is when we're looking for specific amounts, here's what I mean. If you ask for bales of hay, maybe you're doing a bale grazing project, well, bales of hay come in lots of different sizes. So we want to be sure that what you're requesting is very clear for anyone to pick up and understand what amounts are being purchased. So don't reference truckloads. What's a truckload? Don't reference bales, don't reference bags, those things that may mean different things to different people. So we want really clear measurements for the things you're requesting be used or be bought rather with these taxpayer funds that are the Healthy Soil Program grants. Last but not least, projects are unique because, again, they are tailored to the unique concerns of your project site. So again, going back to what Dean talked about identifying your project site and really figuring out what are the resource concerns relative to the soil there that you want to address with your project. And we'll take questions. Again, I know things have been popping into the chat. We'll come back for some live Q&A in just a moment. I'll pause on this screen just to let you know what lives on the screen, and then we'll uh, zip on over to the Healthy Soil Program website and show you what all lives there. But we want to direct your attention to the homepage for the Healthy Soil Program. That's where you will find a link to get signed up. It's a form at the bottom of the page. You'll see it in just a moment. But get signed up for those weekly updates about our program. We use that as a vehicle to remind you of important application deadlines coming up. We'll spotlight questions that come to us from other people in your same boat. So you want to get subscribed to that and see what soil health news we're sharing and soil health events we're sharing through that publication. And if you're yourself are putting out some soil health news or sponsoring some soil health related events, we would love to help you further your reach in terms of the publicity of those events. Now, there's a web page specific to eligible entities. You'll see that in just a moment. Again, we've got two different applicant types. So we've got a web page specific to you as an eligible entity. Contact information available for you there at the bottom of the screen. We strongly encourage you to email us your questions, because then you have an answer in writing that you can hang your hat on. And it's also something that we might even fold into our frequently asked questions document, or as I said, spotlight in the weekly newsletter that we send out. Last but not least, I'll point your attention to that bright yellow oval there on the screen that we've got another webinar coming up March the 5th. So again, just a couple of weeks after our February 23rd launch. That gives you enough time to do the pre-work you're going to do starting today up until we have that online application. And it'll also allow you to put eyes on that application and see what questions you might have particular to that online application and the overall process. So I will stop sharing this screen in order to share another one. I'm just going to scroll down just a bit so people can see what our resources are. So again, a reminder of the application window here. A reminder of our two applicant types. Of course, this is the link that you'll want to be clicking. You're here as an eligible entity, not as an individual applicant. So make sure you're clicking on that right page, on the correct page, I should say. I'll scroll down. We referenced this map in our slides just a moment ago. So once you pop onto our website, if you're curious about what other eligible entities have done in years past, look for those red dots. So I'll just show you an example here of a project implemented down in Lee Soil and Water Conservation District. And that would have been fiscal year 2023, improving rangeland health. So you're welcome to pop onto that map, click on those red dots, spotlighting some of those eligible entity projects. Okay, we referenced the legislation undergirding our program, some helpful education background from Extension, and of course, a tip of the hat to the Healthy Soil Working Group for being so active in this realm. Check out their website for information on what we list there and other things going on with that organization. Our contact information here. And again, a link to get subscribed to those weekly updates. So I'm going to take us back now and take us over to this eligible entity specific page. Okay, you've made it here so far. It's January 18th. You made it to the webinar. I mentioned this March 5th webinar coming up. Make sure you get registered there. And basically, we're walking through the same steps that Dean and I just illustrated, but we'll take a peek at some specific documents here so you know what to look for. All right, Dean, which resource concern guide sheet would you like to take a peek at?
Let's go ahead and just pull up the cropland resource concern guide sheet
Okay.
for everyone to take a look at. I will mention both guide sheets are very similar format. We have one that's geared more toward cropland, one towards rangeland. But you'll notice just there at the top, it says this guide sheet is designed to help you select those conservation practices that you want to address with your project. We have the soil health principles listed there to again remind you of the backbone of our program. It's those 5 soil health principles. Moving on down a little bit, we'll just kind of guide you through how this guide sheet actually works. So you'll notice on the left-hand side, that's where we have a listing of some various resources. Again, this is not a comprehensive list. It would probably be a very difficult list to list all the potential resource concerns, but we've selected those that are very common throughout New Mexico. And so let's take a look at that first one. We have erosion, and we kind of lumped both wind and water erosion into the same category. And so it kind of gives you an idea of what wind and water erosion is. Then the next column there, we have the agriculture practice on cropland. So we have a listing of potential ag practices that you could use on cropland that will help you improve soil health. You'll notice we have cover crops, we have no-till, reduced till, we have field borders. Then you also notice a 3-digit blue practice code. We're not going to click on those, but what that does is with each of those practices, that blue code corresponds to an NRCS practice code. So if you were to click on that, it will take you to the NRCS website for those practice codes. And what that does is it tells you, it gives you a ton of information on how to properly implement, say, a cover crop, some potential cover crop species, timing of planting. There's a wealth of information that you can gain from that. And each of these practices that we have on this guide sheet and on the rangeland guide sheet are linked to those NRCS practice codes to allow you to research the best methods for implementation of the practices you've selected. You'll notice in the final column, and this is something you're going to want to tie into your application, because once you've identified your resource concerns, you've selected your ag practices that you feel are going to be most beneficial within your jurisdiction. You're also going to tie those back to a specific soil health principle. You'll notice here that let's just look for wind erosion. You could use a cover crop to protect the soil surface, and that would actually cover soil health principles 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so you're going to be keeping the soil covered. You're going to be minimizing soil disturbance on cropland. You're going to be maximizing biodiversity, and you're going to be maintaining a living root. And so you're going to tie that back to a soil health principle. And so again, this guide sheet, we highly encourage you to take a look at those, print them off, so that you can have them as you're deciding on your project path. And that way it can kind of guide you into making some of those decisions based on the resource concerns that you've identified that are primary within your jurisdiction. This is not something that you have to turn in with your application packet. It's simply a resource there to help you put together a quality grant application. So I'm not going to go over the rangeland sheet because it's very similar to it's the same process, but I highly encourage all of you to take a look at these resources that we have available.
Sounds good, Dean. Thank you. We also referenced this timeline and budget document in our slides, so we'll zip over there and take a peek at that in just a moment. But let me walk you through what else lives on this website. Then we'll get to some questions in just a bit. I mentioned when our application becomes available, this is the link you will click to get over there. And we'll go ahead and see what that looks like. All right. And this is a one-stop shop for all of our funding opportunities through NMDA. So right now you will not see the Healthy Soil Program available there, but certainly other programs that have funding available show up on this webpage. So it's a really good resource to keep in mind. It'll take us back to the HSP specific webpage for eligible entities. We offer you a link to sam.gov. That's the federal organization that would be responsible for helping you secure a unique entity identifier if you'd like to apply for that upper limit of funding. Otherwise, $25,000 for those, again, that lack that UEI. And again, just a little screenshot of our grants application portal so that you know what to look for. Make sure you're in the right spot. And we referenced a bale grazing template. We'll also point you to a video that is part of a playlist. So were you to click on this, it'll take you to YouTube and you can see some actual moving images, not just still images of some of the projects that have been funded through NMDA's Healthy Soil Program. So now I'm going to take us over to this budget and timeline template. The most critical thing you could possibly observe from these couple of minutes we'll spend on this screen is this button right here, download file. In other words, you do not want to work on this online. You want to make sure you have downloaded a copy of this and that's the document you're working from. So I already pulled up my own document so that I could show it to you in real time. And I'll take us there right now so we can actually complete a couple of examples. And I'll zoom in just a tad bit so we can really focus on all the information that lives here. My keys were a little gummy the other day, so I'm not going to click on this first tab, but I strongly encourage that you do, because that's where you will find directions as to how to complete this template. And those directions, as you might guess, point you back to our frequently asked questions document. Again, a lot of the eligible and ineligible expenses for funding consideration through our program are spelled out in that FAQ. I mentioned to you earlier that the left-hand side of the screen really asks you about your timeline of project activities. So when are you doing what you're doing? And we'll take a peek at this first example that's already built out for you. So you'll notice in our frequently asked questions document that your very first activity, way before you do anything else, is to get started with being out on the project site, pulling some soil samples to send those off to a lab, but also doing that physical in-field soil assessment that doesn't cost anything, but will benefit you greatly in terms of your understanding of your soil health. So this first activity, notice the verbs in here. It's to get soil samples from the project site before starting the project. So here is not where you document what you're buying. Here is where you document what you are doing. So be sure to pay attention to this important context up above this column. All right, we'll take a look at this drop-down menu in just a second. But with this first example, Dean, I'm hoping we can show people how they might complete this first required activity of getting out and pulling some soil samples to send off to the lab.
Okay, yeah, we'll do that. So when you're thinking about, putting your very first activity, which is soil testing, into the timeline budget, of course, it's going to occur in the first quarter for sure. Katie mentioned the drop-down menu. That will definitely be in the first quarter because your soil testing and in-field assessment must occur before any other project activities. Um, and that's necessary so that we can actually see, and you can see as an eligible entity, what the soil was like prior to any changes in management. So you're going to take those soil tests in the first quarter, and that would be considered a service. So you'll notice we've already kind of got you a cheat sheet over here. Like Katie mentioned, the pink colored or peach colored area over here, that is where you document your services. And so again, we recommend you go to the FAQ to kind of look at some of those services that are eligible as well as those that are not. But for this example, we're going to talk about lab-based soil testing. And so again, as part of your application, you're going to include soil testing on each of the fields or each of the parcels that you're going to be operating on throughout the grant term. And so you'll have lab-based testing, and then you're going to identify the name of the business that will perform this service. So again, excuse me, lots and lots of research is going to go into this because you want to decide which company or business you're going to submit those soil samples to get back the results that you feel are good for your area. And so you're going to put the name of the business in that column right there. And so Katie typed in ABC Soil Lab. And so the next item you're going to put is the number of units. And so let's say for this example, you have identified 10 different landowners that you are going to take soil samples on. And so each of those landowners is going to receive one soil sample. So the total number of units that you're going to purchase is 10. And so that's likely to change depending on your application. But for today's example, we're going to do 10 units. The next is where you're going to supply the unit of measurement. For soil testing, that's pretty easy because we are putting soil tests in there. Again, as Katie mentioned earlier, on the units of measure, whether it be a service, whether it's a good, a non-durable good, or a durable good, we want you to be as specific as possible. There's not much more specific you can get with soil testing, but you just put soil testing in there. The next thing you're going to enter, based on your research, is the cost per soil test. And so for this example, let's just going to say it's $65 per soil test. And you'll notice it immediately calculates the answer for you. This spreadsheet is designed to auto-calculate any and all information that you put in here, and so that you don't have to do any manual manipulation of the spreadsheet at all. You just make sure you have the number of units, the type of unit, and the cost per unit that you're going to purchase, and it will auto-calculate for you. So that's an example of soil testing, and you'll notice at the very bottom, it keeps a running total. Each of the different categories, the services, the durable goods, and the non-durable goods all have a running total, so that you can make sure everything's lined up like you have planned. You're going to have your total project funds that shows up, and so for right now, we only have soil testing in there. It's at $650. And one thing we want to draw your attention to, there's an administrative fee that we will pay to you as an eligible entity for administering this project. And you'll notice it is now 15% of the total project. So again, there's nothing you have to type in there. That's auto-calculating from your total project funds. And then your mileage fee. So you as an eligible entity are expected to visit these project sites. And so you will calculate the number of miles that is one way from your eligible entity headquarters to each project site, and put those miles in there, and it will automatically calculate based on the state mileage. So for this example, just so they can see how it works, let's put 30 miles in there, Katie. And boom, we have an answer. Again, that's the amount of mileage that we will reimburse you as an eligible entity for traveling to the project site. So you'll notice the very bottom is the total award. That is the project funds, the admin fee, and the mileage, and so that will be the total award amount that will be listed on your documents. So I think for this point, Katie, do we want to do another example of just cover crop seed real quick?
That'd be great. So we'll show them how the different columns ought to be populated depending on the type of the good or the service that is being requested for as part of the grant.
Okay, so let's say as part of your grant in the first quarter, so you'll go to the drop-down box over here. You'll identify the first quarter, which is August through October of 2024. And the next box there, you are going to identify what you're actually going to do. And so it's at this point that you are going to put in here that you are going to purchase a multi-species cover crop mix from, let's just say, ABC supplier. And so what you can do in this particular box is we want you to get as specific as you can to what you're purchasing. So we're going to purchase a multi-species cover crop mix from ABC supplier. It's going to be planted in October. Let's just put October 1.
Okay. And what locations, Dean? Fields A, B, and C?
Yeah, let's just go with fields A, B, and C. This again will be unique to your district, but we want as much information as possible in the what you're going to do tab, so to speak. Next is where you will identify the name of the durable good. And
really quick,
ahead.
let me point out something that we will fix, even though this document's already available. This actually should be expanding. Since it's not expanding, we will fix that so that you're not overlaying multiple pieces of information that actually should be part of separate columns. So we will get that fixed. All right. So the name of the durable good, the
So
non-durable good.
the name of the non-durable good. And this is where if you are purchasing a like a defined mix from a seed supplier that it's their, say fall soil builder, that is perfectly acceptable as long as you provide the supplier so that we can research what their fall soil builder is. So that's going to be the fall soil builder from ABC supplier. If, however, you are putting together your own specific cover crop mix, it's at this point that you would put in the species and the seeding rates of your cover crop in this particular column right here. So let's just do an example of winter wheat at 45 pounds per acre and winter peas at 5 pounds per acre. Okay, so you have your mix specified over here. So the number of units that you're going to use is the number of units of that specific mix. So you'll notice that specific mix is 50 pounds total. But since you're going to buy that in 50-pound bags, you're going to buy 2 units. The units of measure are going to be 50-pound bags. And then the cost per unit is, let's go with $15 per unit. I know that's probably not an accurate representation with today's market, but I just want you to see. So you're going to provide us as much detail as you can of the name of the non-durable good that you're going to purchase, as well as, like in this instance, it's going to be the species plus the seeding rate. You're going to provide us the number of units that you're going to purchase and the size of those units. So that's going to be 50-pound bags. And again, you're going to purchase 2 of those 50-pound bags, and they're $15 per bag, per unit, per 50-pound bag, for a total of $30. Again, self-calculating. There's no need to try to do the math. So now we have a non-durable good total of $30. So for the next one, let's go ahead. It's going to also occur in the first quarter. And for this one, let's go ahead and we're going to do a service. We're going to rent a no-till drill. Okay, and so we're going to go all the way over to the services tab. And this is where you are going to, again, give a brief description of the service as accurately as possible. And so for this one, we are going to rent a 10-foot no-till drill and tractor.
Dean, I'm going to back us up and say, could you offer a little more specificity about what we're doing with the no-till drill?
Yeah, we are going to rent a no-till drill to plant the fall cover crop.
Perfect. So now we know what we're doing. And where will we be doing that?
Again, you're going to put on fields A, B, and C, or like we've gone in this example, that's going to cover A, B, and C, and so we're going to install that on fields A, B, and C.
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to rent a 10-foot no-till drill and tractor. Okay, it's at this point we're going to identify the business that we are going to rent this from, and it must be a business and not an individual. So this is going to be let's just go with Joe's Tractor Rental. And the number of units that you're going to use on this, we're going to define the units that we're going to rent that in, and that's typically going to be hours. Okay, and so we're going to rent both the no-till drill and the tractor for 10 hours. And then you will determine your cost per unit based on your research and your discussions with Joe's Tractor Rental. And it's going to cost you $15 per hour to rent that no-till drill. So again, you'll notice that auto calculates. It's going to cost us $150 to rent that tractor for 10 hours. And then again, it's the same way with any non-durable good purchases. You're going to identify the name of the non-durable good. You're going to identify the number of units, the type of unit. So what is it? Is it pounds? Is it linear feet? Tons, etc. And then the cost per unit. And so then that will then give you a non-durable goods line item total. It's the exact same process for the durable goods, keeping in mind that there is that durable good limit of $4,999.99. So as you're planning this out, again, refer back to the FAQs often to make sure that everything you're putting in here is in line with the criteria of the program. So, Katie, I'm not sure where you want to go from here.
I think this has been great. I'm just a quick time check here. It's a little after 11, and we promised people we'd turn them loose at 11:30. So I'm ready to take a few questions and see what might be on people's minds.
Perfect.
So pull up the chat here on my screen. Okay, and I also see that a couple of questions came in through the Q&A. So maybe we can sort through those together. Dean?
I'll go ahead and I'll take those two questions in the Q&A. They're both from Vincent in Guadalupe SWCD. It says, would you please clarify what you mean by bale grazing? Okay, so bale grazing has somewhat become recently popular, and it's more than just dumping out bales on the rangeland or cropland. You can actually do it on both to feed your cattle. What the bale grazing includes is a specific pattern that you must lay the bales out to maintain to distribute the organic matter effectively over the area. And then also there's a remaining residue that must be left on the field after the cattle or sheep or goats are pulled off. And so what that residue does, we require at least 25% residue remaining on the field after the livestock are grazed. And then they must be excluded for a certain time period, depending on the goals of your program. But they must be excluded to allow that organic matter that's been left from the bales to decompose and to allow that to actually improve soil health. Again, Katie mentioned the bale grazing template must be completed by an NRCS conservation planner. And it's through that process that they will determine you'll mark out the size of the area that you want to improve, and they will help you determine the number of bales that are required, the amount of livestock that's required, the exclusion period that's required to actually let it benefit soil health. So definitely more than just a feeding program, because there's quite a bit of criteria involved in that. Vince, I hope that answers your question. But we'll move on to the next one real quick. Is the addition of manure or biochar material acceptable activities to be paid for this program? And that is yes. We do accept manure, biochar, compost amendments in this program. We do ask that you look at agronomic rates based on the area that you are, as well as the type of soil that you have, to make sure you're not over applying or under applying, so that it receives maximum benefit for soil health. Next question that just popped up in the Q&A, will these slides be available later for reference? Katie, I'll let you answer that one, and then I think we'll go on to the chat questions here in just a second.
Yeah, hi, Jenny. They will be. So the place to go look for them will be on this website I'm dropping in the chat right now. Again, that's the web page of NMDA's whole website that's really specific to you all as eligible entities seeking healthy soil program funding. So look there for those slides. They'll be pretty immediately available, maybe as soon as today, if not by tomorrow. But the recording of today's webinar will take a bit longer. NMDA will post that on our YouTube page, on the agency's YouTube page. We'll link to it on that eligible entity website I just put in the chat. It just takes a bit of time to get that captioned so that there's greater accessibility for the public. Dean, I see a question here. It actually came into me privately, but question that I think you could probably best address is renting livestock, so renting, not buying, is renting livestock also excluded from funding here?
A lot of that is I would say it's not categorically excluded because you can rent, but it must be for a specific purpose, soil health related, and it must be from a specific business. So outside of your own operation, to rent livestock, to utilize them for a specific grazing period. So it's not categorically excluded, but there are some criteria that must be met. It must be clearly defined how you're going to utilize that livestock, and it cannot be from in-house, so to speak, renting livestock from yourself or family members. It must be from a outside business.
Thank you, Dean. I don't see any other questions in the chat, so let's give a beat here and see if there's anyone who wants to unmute and ask a question out loud. I will say that I also recognize several names of past and current grantees through the eligible entity applicant portal. So if any of those folks have tips that they'd like to offer or a word about their experience having participated in this program, you're welcome to do that as well. Chance, go ahead and unmute with your question. And Chance, we see your hand up, but the unmute button may be a little sticky. There we go.
Okay, is it working now? Yeah.
Working now.
So I had a question about the definition of a cash crop. And my question is basically if we kind of want to use this as a way to introduce a potential crop that could be used over the fall, for example, saffron. I mean, would that be considered a cash crop in your mind, even though it's not really established in New Mexico yet, or would that be a possibility?
How we look at a cash crop if it is harvested and sold off-site.
Okay, so if we don't use that for harvest and we explicitly say that, we just use it for like extension outreach purposes, it should be acceptable or no?
Yes, it basically we look at the distinction between a cover crop and a cash crop as this. A cover crop will be utilized for soil building and must remain on the field after the season. The cash crop is basically harvested and has the capability of being sold off-site. So I would just draw that distinction. If you're simply going to reincorporate that crop back into the land, then it would be considered a cover crop. Does that help you out or not?
Yeah, it does. I don't think it would fit for this particular program. I mean, we could make it fit, but I think there's still the goal, I think, would be to have a part of that crop be harvested, but again, it's with the goal of being permaculture, so the actual plant would stay in the field and maybe some of the material after it's been processed, but I mean, long-term goal would be to show and demonstrate the economic viability for farmers for a product. So,
In that situation, I would encourage you to, maybe look at working with your local cooperative extension service.
well, I mean, I'm asking on that on behalf of Extension. So,
yeah, I think that would, We just need to probably kind of see exactly how you're planning on utilizing that crop. I mean, if it's strictly looking at the research of a potential new crop in the area, I don't know that that would qualify as a soil health improving practice. So if you're looking at the potential use of a new cover crop to then till back in and determine how well of a cover crop that turns out to be, I think that would be fine. But if it's simply, kind of an economic viability study, I would say that would probably not fall within soil health. But we could definitely have a conversation about exactly how you plan on utilizing that, harvesting it, etc., to see, how we might could work that. But like I said, I would still just draw that distinction between the capability of harvesting it and selling it offsite versus tilling it back in or letting it lie for soil health benefits.
Yeah, I mean, I guess not to take away too much time, but just to explain. So the growth period is very different. So that would grow like from October to April, for example, whereas most crops are typically grown in the summer. So it would be, I mean, it could be kind of considered keeping the soil covered and maintaining a living root, but it's maybe a stretch in the traditional terms of a cover crop. So I'm not sure how to go about that, but I just
Yeah,
wanted to ask.
yeah, definitely something worth considering. I mean, if you're looking at trying to um, essentially incorporate a new type of cover crop that's not traditionally grown, I think that would definitely be an option under this circumstance. But more than willing to have you email the HSP uh, email, and we'll get in touch and kind of see how this little bit more information and how maybe
Yep.
we could incorporate extensions research capabilities into something like this.
Thanks, Dean.
Yeah, good discussion there. Dina, to your point, I did drop the email address into the chat. So people who visit the frequently asked questions document and are still left kind of scratching their heads are welcome to reach out to us there. Again, we really encourage those emails just so we all have in writing what the discussion was and the resolution was. And also we tend to pull those good questions from those emails and include them in our weekly listserv so that multiple people can benefit from a question that you pose that they might also have on their minds. I'm also going to put in the chat the link to the homepage for the Healthy Soil Program website. Again, that's the general landing page, not the one specific to you as an eligible entity. That's where you'll need to go in order to sign up for that listserv I just mentioned, for those weekly emails. We try to keep them pretty pithy, keep them to just some grant application tips and deadline reminders, soil health news, soil health events, and that sort of thing. Dean, a question here from Jenny. Can soil and water conservation districts apply for more than one project with separate proposals?
I think that would be fall well within the lines of the protocol of the program to apply for multiple projects, especially if there's a different focus on the project, such as rangeland versus cropland, or a different particular area of the district. I would say if you have two clearly distinct applications, two clearly distinct projects, that may be an option for you, definitely. But yes, we would allow it.
And I think an important piece to address there within an application for an eligible entity will be, what is your capacity for carrying out multiple projects? So again, we'll be looking for that UEI number, that unique entity identifier number that helps us understand, yes, this entity has the capacity to run such a fiscal project through its organization. We'll also be looking to see, is there staff? Is there staff capacity or volunteer capacity to help carry out those projects? So those will be really important items to address in the more narrative pieces of your application. Dean, a question from Cecilia Baca, and it's in the chat there for you, but it relates back to something you and Chance just spoke of, so we might address that right quick.
Okay. Basically, I'm going to answer this in broad terms. A crop is considered a cover crop if it is terminated mechanically, chemically, or through grazing, and so and not harvested to be removed off site. So I think that would definitely fall within the criteria of a cover crop, as long as it is either terminated mechanically, chemically, or through grazing and not harvested for removal off site. I hope that answers your question in a broad sense, because I think that's how we can consider anything. Anything we would consider for a cover crop must be terminated and remain on the field and not harvested for sale offsite.
Thanks for that, Dean. Jenny, I noticed your question here about RPF companies, and that's an unfamiliar acronym for me. So if you don't mind unmuting and asking the question out loud so we can get a little more context, but can you use RPF companies to carry out these sorts of projects? Any more context to consider in that question? And Dean, maybe RPF is a familiar acronym to you. It's not to me.
No, not sure.
Okay. So we'll give Jenny a beat to unmute and ask that question. But in the meantime, others of you are welcome to chime in with questions in the chat, or just simply unmute and ask your question out loud. RFP, got it. And she's without a microphone. So Dean, can a district or another type of eligible entity use an RFP company to carry out projects?
Can you guys hear me?
We hear you, Emily. Yes.
Okay, this is Jenny. I'm on Emily's computer. We're in the same office, but I just don't have a mic on my computer. So RFP is the request for proposals. So we issue those so that companies can basically, bid is not the right word, but they can give us their estimate of what a certain project would cost. So we use that a lot for like brush control, fence installation, things like that. So if we personally didn't have the staff to carry out and complete a project, would we be eligible to use those companies whom we have RFPs through?
Yes, short answer is yes on that. You can hire companies to carry out any and all phases of the project. Bear in mind that when you do submit your timeline and budget, it's that amount that's in the budget that you will be held to, and so that amount's fairly set in stone. So just bear that in mind as you're seeking requests for proposals on certain certain aspects of the project. But yeah, you could definitely do that. Not a problem.
So with that, I mean, I understand that there's a set amount that you would be awarded for the the proposal. If in fact the total amount is going to exceed that, of course the district can pay for that out of a separate fund, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
If it's simply just a service that you are paying for and it ends up costing more, yeah, you could definitely fund that outside the grant.
Okay. Thank you.
One of the things that is spelled out in the Healthy Soil Act is to really increase the capacity of our eligible entities. So where you don't have staff to carry out the components that are essential to implementation of these projects, those are things you can build into your budget, as Dean mentions. I'm thinking of one example of an entity that is implementing a project this year. They have a really strong education and outreach component. So they're actually working with a group of young people who are very tech savvy to go out and see these projects in action, film these projects, so that the net result is some great videos that can be shared with other land managers in that jurisdiction. So probably not every eligible entity has someone who's super handy with a camera and can get things put together for a great YouTube video. That would be such a case as we're talking about here, where you can definitely reach outside of the four walls of your eligible entity to seek the services that are needed to carry out your specific project. So long as it points back to soil health, that's the really driving force here. Dean, I'm noticing it's 11:20, so we'll give just a few moments here for people to weigh in with other questions and comments. Again, inviting those who have previously participated in this program as an eligible entity. If you have anything you'd like to share with the group, you're welcome to do that. All right. I will offer the reminder that we will be back here March the 5th. Again, that's a couple of weeks after that online application opens. So you'll have a chance after today to work through the information on the website, start identifying those project sites, those resource concerns, the various components of your project, and really do some of that important legwork before the online application becomes available February 23rd. So come to us March 5th with your questions. We'll be glad to reconvene here in that time. Dean, any final comments from you before we wrap up today?
I just want to thank everyone for their time in attending and your interest in the Healthy Soil Program. I do want to remind you that please reach out to us through that Healthy Soil Program email with any and all questions, because we want to do our best to help you put together a quality application that has chances of not only receiving a grant, but also improving soil health to the most beneficial impact of your constituents. So please reach out to us. And again, I just want to thank you for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you back here March 5th. Take care.